The first scream didn't come from the witness stand. It came from the back row, sharp and sudden, cutting through the courtroom like a siren that couldn't be turned off. Every head snapped around at once. In the center aisle, a thin woman in a grey cardigan was on her knees, one hand clawing at her throat, the other gripping a folded stack of papers so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her mouth opened again, but this time no sound came out. Just air. Dry. Panicked. The bailiff hesitated. Someone whispered, "Is this a stunt?" Another voice muttered, "She's faking it." Up on the bench, Judge Robert Hale watched without moving. 70 years old, 35 on the bench. He had seen every performance grief could put on. And this at first glance looked like one more attempt to hijack a proceeding already stretched thin. "Ma'am," the bailiff said, stepping forward, "you need to calm down." The woman shook her head hard. Her eyes were wide, glassy, fixed on something no one else could see. Her breathing came in short, tearing bursts. She tried to stand. Failed. Her papers slid from her hand and scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The courtroom buzzed, low, uneasy. At the defense table, Charles Whitman leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Late 50s, silver hair, navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. He glanced sideways at the woman on the floor, then at his attorney, and allowed himself a thin, patient smile. "Your Honor," his attorney said smoothly, not even lowering his voice, "this is exactly what we warned the court about. Emotional instability. Manufactured crises." "She's done this before." A few heads nodded. Someone in the gallery sighed, annoyed. The woman on the floor was Claire Donovan, 59 years old, widow, former school librarian, and until this morning invisible. Now she was being watched like a problem to be managed. Claire's vision tunneled. The walls seemed to lean inward, dark wood, bending under invisible pressure. The air felt thick, like breathing through cloth. She reached for the bench beside her fingers, scraping against polished oak, and finally found a breath that burned all the way down. "No," she whispered. The word barely made it past her lips. I need a moment." The bailiff looked to the judge. Judge Hale's gavel rested under his palm. He didn't lift it. Didn't strike. His eyes were on Claire, now sharp, assessing. Something about the way she held herself didn't match the accusation. The fear was real. Too real. Not loud, not theatrical. It sat in her shoulders in the tight way she folded inward, as if trying to disappear. "Clear the aisle," he said. The room stilled. "Medical assistance," he added. "Now." Whitman's smile faltered. Just a fraction. A paramedic who'd been seated near the back for a different case was already moving. He knelt beside Claire, spoke softly, checked her pulse. His brow furrowed. "She's hypoxic," he said. "Pulse is irregular." A ripple went through the gallery. Someone sucked in a breath. Claire felt hands under her arms, lifting her gently onto a bench. Her lungs finally caught, dragging in air that tasted like dust and metal. Tears slipped down her face, not from pain, but from the humiliation of being seen like this. Weak, broken, convenient. Across the room, Whitman leaned forward, now voice tight. Your Honor, with respect, this proceeding cannot be derailed every time Ms. Donovan decides to. Sit down, Judge Hale said. 2 words, flat, final. Silence fell hard. Claire's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they met the judge's. Something passed between them. Not recognition. Not yet. But a flicker. A question without words. The paramedic helped her sip water. Her hands shook. The papers on the floor had been gathered by a court clerk, a young woman with nervous eyes who whispered, "Take your time," as if time was something Claire could afford. Outside, through the tall windows, sirens wailed and faded. Seattle traffic moved on indifferent. When order was restored, Judge Hale adjusted his glasses and looked down at the room like a man surveying damage after a storm. "We will recess for 10 minutes, he said. "This court does not proceed over a medical emergency." Whitman exhaled sharply through his nose. His attorney leaned in, murmured something. Whitman shook his head, once slow, irritated. Claire remained seated, shoulders hunched, staring at her hands. She could feel eyes on her from every angle. Judgment, suspicion, boredom. The old, familiar mix. She had expected hostility. She had prepared for disbelief. What she hadn't prepared for was how small she would feel sitting in the same room as the man who had signed off on her eviction notice, frozen her accounts, and rewritten the narrative of her life with a press release and a check. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Judge Hale returned first. He took his seat but didn't call the room to order. Instead, he opened the file in front of him again. Thicker than most. Tabs worn. Margins dense with notes. "Ms. Donovan," he said. Claire flinched, then looked up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Before we resume," he continued, "I want clarity. Not theater. Not conjecture. Facts." He turned a page. "You are here contesting the emergency transfer of control of Donovan Maritime Holdings. You claim coercion, misrepresentation, and unlawful board action. Is that correct?" "Yes," Claire said. Her voice was steadier now. "I am." Whitman laughed. Not loudly, just enough to be heard. "Your Honor," he said, standing despite himself. "This is absurd. That company hasn't been hers in years. She was a placeholder, a name, nothing more." Judge Hale didn't look at him. "Ms. Donovan," he said, "do you understand the burden of proof you're carrying?" Claire swallowed. Her fingers curled into her skirt. She nodded once. "I do." "And you still wish to proceed?" She hesitated, just long enough for Whitman's attorney to smirk. Then Claire straightened. "Yes," she said, "because what he's counting on is that I won't." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A murmur rose, then died. Judge Hale studied her for a long moment. Not the papers, not the attorneys. Her. "Very well," he said. "Then this court will hear you." Whitman sat back down slowly. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked, calculating. Claire took a breath. This time it held. She didn't know yet that half the room was already under subpoena. She didn't know the financial auditors were waiting 2 floors down. She didn't know that the quiet man in the 3rd row, the one no one had noticed, had flown in overnight on her call. What she knew was this: they thought she was finished. They thought the collapse in the aisle was the end of her credibility. They were wrong. And as Judge Hale lifted his gavel, the air in the room changed, subtle but unmistakable, like pressure dropping before a storm. The door to the anteroom closed with a muted click, sealing Claire off from the courtroom, and the eyes that had already decided who she was. She sat alone on a wooden bench, hands folded in her lap, staring at a small crack in the wall paint that ran like a fault line from the ceiling down toward the baseboard. Her breathing had slowed, but the tremor in her fingers hadn't. It never did when the room went quiet. Silence always gave memory too much space. A paper cup of water rested beside her, untouched. On the other side of the wall, she could hear voices, low, controlled. Lawyers negotiating tone and timing, like chess players moving pieces they didn't care about. Somewhere in that room, Charles Whitman was smiling again. He always smiled when he thought time was on his side. Claire closed her eyes. She saw a different room. Smaller, warmer. A kitchen that smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. A man standing at the sink sleeves rolled up, humming off-key, while the morning news murmured in the background. That man had once looked at her like she was solid ground. That man no longer existed. The door opened without warning. A woman stepped in heels, quiet against the tile. Mid-60s, steel-grey hair cut short and precise. She wore a dark blazer, with no jewelry except a thin gold watch that had seen years. Her eyes took in Claire in a single sweep, not unkind, not curious. Assessing. "Ms. Donovan," she said. "I'm Eleanor Price." Claire frowned. "I don't have an attorney." "You do, now," Eleanor said, pulling a folder from under her arm. "At least for today." Claire's shoulders tightened. "Who sent you?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She set the folder on the bench between them and opened it, revealing documents marked with color-coded tabs. Financial statements, board minutes, email chains, things Claire recognized and things she didn't. "I used to represent your husband," Eleanor said finally, before he decided ethics were optional. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Then why are you here?" "Because he made a mistake," Eleanor replied. "And because I don't like bullies who think age makes a woman disposable." Claire studied her face, searching for performance. She found none. "I didn't collapse on purpose," Claire said quietly. "I know that's what they think." Eleanor nodded once. "I know. How because people who fake weakness don't hate it this much." The words landed harder than sympathy ever had. Claire's throat tightened. Eleanor closed the folder. "You have exactly one chance in there. Judge Hale will give you rope. Whitman will try to hang you with it. My job is to make sure it's the other way around." Claire hesitated. "Why would you risk this?" Eleanor's mouth curved not quite a smile. "Because I sat across from Charles Whitman 15 years ago, when he decided a longshoreman's death was an acceptable line item. I lost that case. I've been waiting ever since." Before Claire could respond, the door opened again. Judge Hale stood there alone. Up close, he looked older. the lines in his face deeper, more tired. But his eyes were sharp, fixed on Claire, with an intensity that made Eleanor step back instinctively. "Miss Donovan," he said. "Counsel." "Your Honor," Eleanor replied. He gestured toward the door. "We're resuming." The courtroom felt different when they returned. The murmur was lower, expectant, like the audience knew something was about to shift, even if they didn't know what. Whitman glanced up as Claire took her seat again. His gaze flicked to Eleanor and stalled. The smile vanished. "Well," he murmured to his attorney, "that's unexpected." Judge Hale called the room to order. His voice carried weight, steady and deliberate. "Ms. Donovan," he said, "you may proceed." Claire stood. Her knees wobbled for a moment, then locked. She placed both hands on the table, grounding herself in the cool wood. "My name is Claire Donovan," she began. Her voice was calm now. "For 32 years, I worked in public schools in this state. I raised 2 children. I married a man I trusted. And for the last 6 months, I have been told that none of that qualifies me to speak about the company I helped build." Whitman's attorney rose. "Objection. Narrative." "Overruled," Judge Hale said. "Let her speak." Claire continued. "Donovan Maritime didn't start in a boardroom. It started in a garage in Ballard. I balanced the books while Charles was still trying to convince investors he knew what he was doing. I signed payroll checks when contracts fell through. I mortgaged my mother's house to keep the lights on." She looked directly at Whitman now. He didn't look back. "When my husband decided I was no longer useful, he didn't fire me," she said. "He erased me." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a single envelope. Plain, worn. "This," she said, "is the letter I received the morning my accounts were frozen. No warning, no explanation, just instructions." Eleanor stepped forward, took the envelope and handed it to the clerk. Whitman's attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. Whitman shook his head, jaw clenched. Judge Hale scanned the letter. His brow furrowed. "Miss Donovan," he said slowly, "this correspondence is dated 3 weeks before the board vote." "Yes," Claire said. "And the board vote was illegal." "That's a conclusion," Whitman snapped. "It's a fact," Eleanor replied evenly. "And we can prove it." Judge Hale raised a hand. Silence returned. Claire took a breath. This was the edge. The place where people like her were supposed to step back, apologize, retreat. She didn't. "There is one thing Charles Whitman never understood," she said. "I was quiet because I was listening." She nodded once toward the back of the room. The man in the 3rd row stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a plain brown jacket that didn't belong in a courtroom full of tailored suits. His hair was white at the temples. His face was weathered eyes steady. "My name is Frank Morales," he said. "I ran shipping operations for Donovan Maritime for 24 years. Whitman turned fully now. "You're not authorized," Judge Hale's gavel came down. "Once." "Mr. Morales," the judge said, "you are under oath." Frank nodded. "Yes, sir." "I'm here," Frank continued, "because Ms. Donovan asked me to come. Because she's the only one who ever asked why crews were being reassigned without notice. why safety reports were disappearing, why men were getting hurt. The room held its breath. Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. Small, unremarkable. I kept copies, he said, because someone had to. Whitman surged to his feet. This is a fishing expedition. Judge Hale leaned forward. His voice dropped cold and precise. Sit down. Whitman didn't move. Mr. Whitman, the judge, said you are perilously close to contempt. Whitman sat. The clerk took the flash drive. The screen behind the bench flickered to life. Numbers filled the display. Spreadsheets, incident reports, dates, patterns. Claire watched Whitman's face as recognition set in. The color drained. The calculation turned frantic. She felt something steady settle in her chest. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth catching up. Judge Hale studied the screen, then looked back at Claire. Ms. Donovan, he said, it appears this court has underestimated you. Claire met his gaze. You're not the only one, she replied, and as the weight of what was unfolding pressed down on the room, one thing became clear to everyone. Watching the woman they had dismissed as fragile had been holding the foundation together all along. The first lie collapsed quietly. Not with a shout, not with handcuffs, just a subtle shift in posture as Charles Whitman realized the room was no longer bending around him. Judge Hale ordered the screen paused. The numbers hung there, frozen, clinical, impossible to argue with. A pattern of rerouted funds, safety inspections signed off without review, injury reports fooled and buried, deaths labeled accidents because someone needed them to be. Whitman's attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, even if these documents are authentic, they don't establish intent. At most, they suggest administrative oversight. Frank Morales let out a short, humorless breath. Men don't die from oversight, he said. A few people in the gallery shifted. One woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Judge Hale turned to Frank. Mr. Morales, did you ever raise concerns to the board? Yes, sir, Frank said. More than once. And what happened? They stopped answering my emails. Then my access badge stopped working. He glanced toward Whitman. Ms. Donovan was the only one who called me back. Claire felt the weight of eyes on her again, but this time it was different. Heavier, curious, not dismissive. Judge Hale leaned back in his chair. His gaze drifted not to Whitman, but to Claire. Ms. Donovan, he said. Why now? The question was quiet, almost gentle. Claire swallowed, because the silence stopped working. Whitman scoffed. This is emotional grandstanding. No, Eleanor said calmly. This is timing. She stepped forward, holding up another document. Your Honor, while this hearing was in recess, we received confirmation from the Department of Transportation. A formal inquiry has been opened based on the materials Mr. Morales provided. The room erupted. Judge Hale brought the gavel down hard. Order returned in ragged pieces. Whitman stood. This is outrageous. My client is being ambushed. Judge Hale's eyes hardened. Your client has enjoyed the benefit of surprise for decades. Sit. Whitman sat. His hands were clenched now. The smile was gone for good. The hearing adjourned an hour later, not with resolution, but with momentum. Subpoenas issued, emergency injunctions filed, control of the company temporarily frozen pending review. As the room emptied, Claire remained seated. Her legs felt hollow. Eleanor touched her elbow. "You did well," she said quietly. "I didn't plan in this," Claire replied. "No," Eleanor said. "You prepared for it." In the hallway outside, the air was thick with voices. Reporters had gathered microphones, ready cameras already rolling. Names were being shouted. Questions hurled like stones. "Ms. Donovan, is this retaliation? Mr. Whitman, do you deny these allegations?" Claire hesitated at the doorway. The instinct to retreat surged. Eleanor leaned close. "You don't owe them anything," she said. "But if you speak, choose one sentence. Make it count." Claire nodded. She stepped forward. The noise surged, then stilled as cameras focused. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," Claire said. "I came to tell the truth. And I'm not done." She turned and walked away before the questions could start again. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the IV taped to her arm. The doctor had insisted. Stress dehydration, a heart rhythm that needed monitoring. "You're lucky," the nurse said gently, as she adjusted the line. "Most people don't listen to their bodies." Claire smiled faintly. "Most people are taught not to." The television in the corner murmured. A familiar face filled the screen. Charles Whitman, flanked by his attorney, issuing a statement. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "A private family matter being distorted by disgruntled former employees." Claire turned it off. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another buzz. A text this time. "You should stop, for your own good." Claire stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened, then steadied. She deleted the message without replying. A knock came at the door. Judge Hale stood there again. Not in robes this time. Just a dark coat, his tie loosened. He looked tired. Older than he had that morning. "May I come in?" he asked. Claire nodded. He took the chair by the bed, but didn't sit right away. He studied the floor, as if choosing words carefully. "I reviewed the filings," he said, "and the history." Claire waited. "There are things about this case that don't sit right with me," he continued. "Procedural irregularities, delays that benefited one side repeatedly." "Whitman has friends," Claire said. "Yes," Judge Hale replied. "He does." He sat now, folded his hands. "Miss Donovan, I need to ask you something, and you're free not to answer." Claire met his eyes. "When your husband transferred the company assets into a trust 2 years ago," he said, "were you informed?" Claire shook her head. "I found out when the bank stopped returning my calls." Judge Hale exhaled slowly. "That trust is currently under my court's jurisdiction." Claire stiffened. "Your Honor." "This is not official," he said quickly. "And it won't be. But I want you to know something." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin folder. "Not court-issued. Personal. There is a second set of beneficiaries listed, he said. Claire's breath caught. Judge Hale looked at her, searching her face. You. The room seemed to tilt. That's not possible, Claire said. He would never. He didn't add you, Judge, Hale said. Someone else did. He opened the folder, revealing a signature at the bottom of a form. Claire recognized it instantly. Her mother's handwriting. Careful. Looping. She filed it 6 months before she died, Judge Hale said, without his knowledge. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. She hated him. She didn't trust him, the judge corrected. And she trusted you. Tears blurred Claire's vision. Not grief, not yet. Something warmer, stronger. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Judge Hale hesitated. Because the person who added you also added a contingency clause. Claire looked up. If control of the company was ever transferred under duress, he said, the trust reverts. Silence stretched between them. Claire laughed once, short and disbelieving. So all this time you were never powerless, Judge Hale said quietly. You were just uninformed. The weight of it settled slowly. The collapse in the aisle, the years of erasure, the quiet endurance. It hadn't been weakness, it had been patience. Judge Hale stood. I will recuse myself from any future proceedings related to this matter, effective immediately. Claire nodded. Thank you. He paused at the door. Ms. Donovan, he said. Be careful. She met his gaze. I've been careful my whole life. He left. Outside, the city moved on. Buses hissed. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Claire lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. Whitman thought this was about control, about dominance, about breaking someone quietly enough that no one noticed. He had never understood what she was capable of when the truth was finally allowed to breathe. And somewhere deep in the machinery of the company that bore her name, the ground was already shifting beneath his feet. The first call came at dawn, sharp enough to pull Claire out of a shallow sleep. Her phone vibrated against the hospital tray, rattling the plastic cup beside it. She stared at the screen for a second, before answering already braced. Ms. Donovan Eleanor Price said without preamble. We have movement. Claire pushed herself upright. The room was still dim. The city outside, the window washed in grey morning light. What kind of movement? The kind that means Whitman didn't sleep. Eleanor replied. He convened an emergency board call at 6:15, tried to push through a vote before the injunction hit the docket. Claire's jaw tightened. Did it work? No, Eleanor said. Because someone beat him to it. A pause. Deliberate. You, Eleanor added. Claire closed her eyes. I didn't do anything. You didn't have to, Eleanor said. The trust did. Claire swung her legs over the side of the bed, feet touching cold tile. Explain. The contingency clause your mother filed was triggered the moment Whitman attempted to consolidate voting power under disputed authority, Eleanor said. Control snapped back automatically. Temporary, but legally binding. Claire let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for years. So what happens now? Eleanor's voice softened just slightly. Now he panics. As if summoned by the word, Claire's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She ignored it. Outside the hospital, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks groaned to life. A siren wailed somewhere distant. Ordinary sounds layered over extraordinary consequences. By the time Claire was discharged later that morning, the headlines had already begun to shift. Whitman Maritime faces federal scrutiny. Board, power, freeze, triggers. Internal war. Silent co-founder emerges. Claire didn't read past the first lines. She didn't need to. The shape of the day was clear enough. Eleanor met her at the curb, rain beading on the hood of her car. You ready? Claire hesitated. For what? For being seen, Eleanor said. The drive downtown was quiet. Eleanor didn't turn on the radio. Claire watched the city slide past familiar streets, taking on a strange new weight. Every corner held a memory she hadn't examined in years. The school where she'd worked. The coffee shop where she used to meet Frank Morales before early shifts. The bank branch where she'd once stood for 2 hours trying to understand why her accounts no longer existed. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a glass tower she'd avoided for a decade. This building, Eleanor said as they parked, is where Whitman learned to hide. The elevator ride up was silent. The doors opened onto a floor of muted grey and brushed steel. People were already waiting. Some stood, some sat. All of them turned when Claire stepped out. The boardroom was smaller than she remembered. Less impressive. A long table, 12 chairs, one empty at the head. Whitman was already there. He stood near the window phone, pressed to his ear, voice low and sharp. When he saw Claire, he stopped speaking mid-sentence. The color drained from his face. He ended the call without a word. Well, he said, this is unexpected. Claire didn't respond. She took the seat opposite him. Eleanor remained standing behind her hands loosely clasped. The board members shifted, avoided eye contact. Old allies, now suddenly cautious. Whitman straightened his jacket. Let's be clear, he said. This is temporary. A technicality. Claire leaned forward slightly. So was freezing my life. A murmur rippled around the table. Whitman's eyes narrowed. You don't belong here. I built this place, Claire said. Her voice was even. I just stopped pretending I didn't. He laughed, brittle. You were a librarian. I was a systems analyst before you convinced me it was safer to stay invisible, she replied. I designed the logistics software you still use. I trained half the executives in this room. Silence. One man cleared his throat. Is that true? Whitman shot him a look. Don't be ridiculous. Claire reached into her bag and placed a slim tablet on the table. She tapped once. The screen lit up with code. Dates. Names. Version history doesn't lie, she said. Whitman lunged forward. You can't just... Sit, Eleanor said calmly. The word carried more authority than a shout. Whitman froze. Slowly he sat back down. Claire didn't look at him. She addressed the room. I didn't come here for revenge, she said. I came because this company is rotting from the inside, and you all know it. You've been complicit because it was easier than speaking up. A woman at the far end shifted. If the regulators get involved? They already are, Eleanor said. And cooperating early tends to go better than the alternative. Whitman slammed his hand on the table. This is a coup. No, Claire said. This is accountability. The meeting ended without a vote, without resolution, but with something far more dangerous for Whitman. Uncertainty. As they left the building, Eleanor's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then at Claire. He's making calls, she said. Old friends, political favors. He's not done. Claire nodded. Neither am I. That afternoon, the knock came at her door. She hadn't been home an hour. The apartment was quiet, bare, in a way it hadn't been when she'd lived there with Whitman. His absence felt like space returning to a room. She opened the door to find a man in his 40s, suit slightly rumpled eyes, sharp but cautious. Ms. Donovan, he said. My name is Thomas Reed. I work for the Department of Justice. Claire didn't step aside. You're early. He smiled faintly. We've been watching Mr. Whitman for a long time. She held his gaze. Then you know he doesn't fall quietly. No, Reed said. He makes noise. He drags people down with him. Claire considered this. What do you need from me? Access, Reed said. And patience. She stepped back, opening the door wider. They sat at her kitchen table as dusk settled outside. Reed spoke carefully, choosing words like pieces of glass. There's evidence of financial misconduct that goes beyond maritime operations, he said. Shell entities, political donations, influence trading. Claire listened, absorbed. She felt strangely calm. He's been laundering power, not just money, she said. Reed's eyebrows lifted. That's an apt way to put it. When he left, the sky had gone dark. Claire stood alone in the quiet, the weight of the day pressing down. Her phone buzzed again. This time the number was familiar. Whitman, she answered. You think you've won, he said. His voice was tight, furious. You think this makes you powerful. Claire said nothing. You were nothing without me, he continued. And you'll be nothing when this is over. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. You're wrong, she said. I was everything before you. She ended the call. Outside, rain began to fall harder, streaking the windows, blurring the city lights into soft, trembling lines. Claire sat at the table long after the phone went dark. She thought of her mother, of the quiet contingency clause filed in secret, of patience mistaken for weakness. Whitman had always believed power was something you took. He was about to learn what happened when it was reclaimed, and somewhere deep inside the machinery he'd built to protect himself, gears were grinding against each other, heating up, ready to fail. The leak didn't come from the boardroom or the courtroom. It came from a place Charles Whitman had never bothered to look. A loading dock in Tacoma, dawn, salt in the air. The low grind of diesel engines, warming up for the morning run. Frank Morales stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching a forklift ease a container onto a waiting truck. The manifest on his clipboard didn't match the markings stenciled on the steel. It hadn't for years. He had learned to read what was missing as carefully as what was there. You sure about this? The driver asked, voice low. Frank nodded once. I'm sure. The driver hesitated, then took the envelope Frank offered him. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough to cover what would come next. By the time the truck pulled away, Frank had already made the call. Across the city, Claire Donovan was standing at her kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Whitman's face the moment control slipped from his hands. The disbelief, the anger, the fear he'd spent a lifetime outsourcing to other people. Her phone rang. Claire Frank said. His voice carried the dock with it. Wind, distance. It's bigger than we thought. She straightened. How big enough that he rerouted shipments under humanitarian cover, Frank said. Relief labels, emergency waivers, things no one questions. Claire closed her eyes. What's inside Frank didn't answer immediately. Things that don't belong on boats, he said finally. And money that doesn't belong anywhere. An hour later, Eleanor Price stood in Claire's living room coat, still on eyes sharp. Tell me everything Eleanor said. Claire did. Eleanor listened without interrupting her mind, already moving 3 steps ahead. When Claire finished, Eleanor nodded once. That explains the gaps. What gaps? Claire asked. The ones that never lined up. Eleanor replied. Why certain investigations stalled. Why certain ports were untouchable. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message. We need to loop Reed in. Now. The meeting happened that afternoon in a federal building that didn't advertise its purpose. No seal on the door, no flag out front, just a receptionist who didn't ask questions and hallways that swallowed sound. Thomas Reed sat across from Claire at a narrow table, hands folded, expression unreadable. You understand what you're alleging, he said. If this is accurate, it's not just corporate crime. I understand, Claire replied. I've lived inside it. Reed studied her for a long moment. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Claire didn't bristle. She didn't defend herself. Because no one listens to a woman they've already decided is obsolete. Reed looked down. When he looked back up, something had shifted. They do when she's right. He stood. We'll move. They moved faster than Whitman expected. Within 48 hours, Customs flagged 3 shipments. Within 72 bank accounts went dark, not frozen. Seized. Whitman found out in the middle of the night. He stormed into his penthouse office, tie-loosened phone pressed to his ear, shouting at a voice that no longer sounded afraid of him. You can't do this, he snapped. You think she's protecting you. She'll fold. He hung up and stared out at the city lights, glittering like something owned. The first subpoena arrived at dawn, the second before lunch. By mid-afternoon, the press had shifted tone. Less speculation, more certainty. Insiders confirm federal expansion. Whitman Network under review. Former executives cooperate. Claire watched the coverage from Eleanor's office arms, crossed jaw tight. Frank's name is out there, she said. He knew it would be. Eleanor replied. So did you. Claire nodded. I don't regret it. Eleanor studied her. You will, and then you won't. That's how this works. That evening, as rain streaked the windows again, Claire's phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen in years. Her daughter. Claire answered on the first ring. "Hi." There was a pause. Then Mum. "Are you okay?" Claire swallowed. "I am." "They're saying a lot of things," her daughter said. "About Dad." "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are they true?" Claire leaned back in her chair. The ceiling above her was cracked paint peeling in places. Imperfect. Honest. "Yes," she said. "They are." Her daughter exhaled slowly. "I'm glad it's you." Claire closed her eyes. "So am I." The call ended gently. No shouting. No blame. Just the quiet recalibration of truth. That night Whitman came to her door. Not in person. In the only way he still could. A courier envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. The kind meant to impress. Inside a settlement offer. Numbers spelled out carefully. Properties. Silence clauses. A lifetime of comfort in exchange for retreat. Claire didn't read past the second page. She called Eleanor. "He's offering me everything Claire said." Eleanor didn't sound surprised. "He always does? When he's scared." "What happens if I say no?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Then he escalates." Claire looked at the envelope on the table, at the neat, confident signature at the bottom. "Good," she said. "Let him." She tore the document in half. Then again. Then again. Smaller and smaller until the pieces filled the trash. The escalation came quickly. Whitman's allies began to fall, one by one. Deals unwound. Immunity offers accepted. Stories traded for safety. Frank Morales went into protective custody. Reed checked in daily. Eleanor slept in her office. And Claire, at the center of it all, felt something unexpected settle in. Calm. The kind that comes when fear has finally been named and stripped of its disguise. Late one night, as she sat alone at her desk, the city quiet outside Claire opened an old box she'd carried from place to place without ever unpacking. Inside were notebooks, ledgers, her handwriting, years of it. She flipped through pages filled with notes she'd taken quietly, while men talked over her. Patterns she'd seen and recorded just in case. She smiled a small, tired curve of the mouth. "You were never weak," she murmured to her reflection in the dark window. "You were waiting." Outside, the rain stopped. Clouds thinned. Somewhere beyond the city, trucks rolled, ports hummed, and systems built on secrecy began to crack under the weight of their own lies. And Charles Whitman alone in his glass tower stared at a city that no longer answered to him, finally understanding the cost of underestimating the woman who had kept him afloat. The arrest didn't happen with sirens or shouting. It happened in a conference room with bad coffee and a clock that ticked too loudly. Charles Whitman sat at the head of the table, jacket off now, sleeves rolled up as if preparation alone could save him. Across from him, Thomas Reed placed a recorder on the table and pressed a single button. The red light came on. Final. Unforgiving. For the record, Reed said this interview is voluntary. Whitman laughed short and sharp. "You're here because my wife is vindictive." My former wife, Reed, corrected without looking at him. And we're here because of the ports. Whitman's eyes flicked. Just once, it was enough. Outside the glass wall, 2 agents stood with their backs to the room. Still, patient. Whitman had always hated waiting. He leaned forward, hands splayed on the table. You don't have jurisdiction over international shipping trusts. Reed nodded. We do when those trusts are used to move undeclared assets through domestic ports under federal waiver. Whitman opened his mouth, closed it, reconsidered. Across town, Claire Donovan watched the city wake from Eleanor's office window. The rain had washed the streets clean overnight. Sunlight slid between buildings, catching on glass, turning everything sharp and bright. She felt exposed in that light, but steady. Eleanor stood beside her phone, pressed to her ear. She listened, nodded once, hung up. It's happening, Eleanor said. Claire didn't ask how. She felt it in her bones, the same way she'd always felt trouble coming long before anyone else named it. What comes next? Claire asked. Eleanor turned. Now he tries to trade. Whitman tried to trade an hour later. The door opened, and he walked out, flanked by counsel, face carefully arranged. He spotted the cameras immediately, adjusted his expression. Victim, warrior, both. I've cooperated fully, he said. I trust the truth will prevail. He didn't look at Claire. Reed stepped into the frame. Mr. Whitman has been detained pending further review. A murmur surged. Cameras flashed. Whitman's jaw tightened. He glanced back, then finally eyes searching for her across the distance. Claire met his gaze and held it. No anger. No triumph. Just clarity. The agents moved. Hands on arms. Not rough, not gentle, professional. As Whitman was led away, something small fell from his pocket and skidded across the pavement. A key fob, polished, useless now. That afternoon, the indictment unspooled like a map. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction. Violations stacked one on another until the shape of it was undeniable. Frank Morales testified by video, his voice steady. The dock behind him blurred. He named dates, routes, names. Others followed. Accountants, port officials. Men and women who had learned the cost of silence and decided to pay it now. Claire sat in the back of the room, hands folded, listening. Each story fit into the spaces she'd marked years ago in her notebooks. Not surprises, confirmations. During a break, a woman approached her. Early 60s, conservative suit, nervous hands. I worked for him, the woman said. Human resources. I saw things. I didn't speak up. Claire studied her face. The shame, the fear. Are you speaking now? Claire asked. The woman nodded. Yes. Then you're doing what you can, Claire said. The woman's eyes filled. Thank you. The trial moved fast, faster than Whitman had planned. Evidence piled up. The press stopped hedging. Former shipping magnate charged network of deception, exposed whistleblowers. Step forward. On the third day, Whitman took the stand. He wore a different suit, less expensive. The cut still sharp, but the illusion thinning. He spoke confidently at first. Too confidently. He blamed advisors, miscommunications, systems he claimed were too complex for any one person to control. "Did you authorize the transfers?" the prosecutor asked. Whitman hesitated. "I delegated authority." To whom the prosecutor pressed. Whitman named a man who had already pled out, and the relief labels the prosecutor continued. "Did you approve those?" Whitman's mouth tightened. "I trusted my operations team." The prosecutor turned. No further questions. Eleanor rose for cross. She moved slowly, deliberately, a teacher approaching a chalkboard. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "you testified that you trusted your team." "Yes. You trusted them to hide injury reports I didn't know, to falsify manifests I didn't, to threaten employees who asked questions." "I object," Whitman snapped. The judge overruled. Eleanor leaned in. "You trusted them to erase your wife?" The room went still. Whitman's face flushed. "That's outrageous." "Is it?" Eleanor asked. She held up a document. "This is your email. 2 years ago. You wrote, quote, 'Claire is a liability. Handle it.'" Whitman stared at the paper. For the first time, he looked small. "That's out of context," he said. Eleanor nodded. "Everything is when the truth finally arrives." The verdict came before dusk. Guilty on all counts. The sentence followed. Long, measured, unavoidable. As the judge spoke, Whitman's shoulders slumped. He didn't look at Claire. He didn't look at anyone. When it was over, the room exhaled. Outside, the crowd waited. Claire didn't go to them. She stepped aside, letting others speak. Reed, Eleanor. Frank appearing briefly guarded but resolute. Claire walked home. The apartment felt different now. Lighter. The air moved more freely. She set her bag down and stood in the quiet, listening to her own breathing. Her phone rang. Her daughter again. "They sentenced him," her daughter said. "Yes." A pause. "Then I'm proud of you." Claire closed her eyes. "I love you," I know, her daughter replied. That night, Claire opened her notebooks one last time. She read the margins. The questions she'd written when she thought no one would ever ask them out loud. She stacked the notebooks neatly and placed them in a drawer. Closed it. The waiting was over. Outside, the city hummed. Ports adjusted. Systems recalibrated. Life went on, altered but intact. And Claire Donovan, once invisible, once underestimated, stood in the center of her own life, at last not as a symbol or a headline, but as a woman who had chosen truth and carried it all the way through. The silence after the verdict was louder than the trial had ever been. It followed Claire Donovan home, settled into the corners of the apartment, lingered in the spaces where tension had lived for years. There were no sirens now, no phones ringing non-stop. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of traffic, and the unfamiliar sound of her own unguarded breathing. She stood by the window and watched the city glow into evening. Somewhere beyond the buildings, cargo ships moved through the water, under new supervision, new rules, new eyes. The world hadn't stopped. It had corrected course. A knock came at the door. Claire didn't startle this time. She opened it calmly. Eleanor Price stood there, coat over her arm. face softened by something close to relief. I thought I'd find you staring out a window. Claire smiled faintly. Old habit. Eleanor stepped inside. She glanced around, taking in the modest furniture, the boxes not yet unpacked. You could have had anything, she said. Penthouse. Security. A clean slate, somewhere warm. Claire shook her head. I wanted this. Why? Because this is where I remember who I was. Before I started shrinking, Claire replied. Eleanor nodded once. Fair enough. They sat at the small kitchen table. Eleanor poured 2 glasses of water from the tap, slid one across. The appeals will come, she said. They always do, I know. But they won't change the outcome. Eleanor continued. The evidence was too solid, the pattern too clear. Claire traced a faint ring on the tabletop left by an old mug. I don't need him to suffer, she said. I needed him to stop. Eleanor studied her. You know that makes you different from him. Claire met her gaze. I know. After Eleanor left, Claire gathered the last of the legal files stacked near the door. She carried them to the building's recycling room, fed them into the bin one folder at a time. Each soft thud felt like punctuation. That night, sleep came easily for the first time in years. Morning arrived with pale light and the sound of someone knocking again, lighter this time. Claire opened the door to find Frank Morales standing there, hands awkward at his sides, eyes uncertain. I didn't know if it was okay, he said. It is, Claire replied. She stepped aside. Come in. Frank looked around, then sat carefully as if worried he might break something. They moved me, he said. New place, safer. I'm glad. He nodded. I wanted to say thank you for not letting them bury it. Claire shook her head. You kept the records because you asked me to. Frank said, because you listened. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then Frank cleared his throat. They offered me my job back. Claire looked up. Did you take it? No, he said. I'm done fixing what someone else keeps breaking. I want to teach. She smiled. You'd be good at that. After he left, Claire walked the neighborhood. The same streets she'd traveled for years felt altered not by distance, but by posture. Her shoulders were lower, her stride steadier. People passed her unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place inside one woman's life. At the corner store, the cashier recognized her. You're her, the woman said. Not accusatory, just curious. Claire hesitated. Yes. The cashier nodded. My sister worked at the port. She quit because of him. I'm glad you spoke. Claire felt the words settle. So am I. Later that afternoon, Claire's daughter arrived. They stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain, then embraced. It wasn't dramatic. It was solid. I watched the coverage, her daughter said as they sat together. I saw how calm you were. Claire smiled. I wasn't always. I know, her daughter replied. That's what makes it matter. They talked for hours. About the past, the things they'd avoided. About the future carefully this time, without assumptions. Before leaving, her daughter paused at the door. "I want you to teach me what you know," she said. "Not the company stuff. The other part." Claire understood. "How to see patterns," she said. "How to trust yourself." Her daughter nodded. "Yes." That evening, Claire returned to her notebooks, not to hide them away, but to choose what would live on. She began rewriting them, not as evidence, as instruction. She wrote about silence and how it grows when fed, about patience and how it becomes power when paired with memory, about the difference between waiting and surrendering. Weeks passed. Claire testified once more this time in a quieter room to a committee tasked with reform. She spoke plainly, without bitterness. The people listening leaned forward. A non-profit reached out asking if she would advise. A union asked her to speak. A school invited her back to talk to students about systems and accountability. She accepted selectively, carefully. She had learned the cost of giving everything away. One evening, as the sun set amber over the city, Claire stood again by the window. The same view. A different woman. Her phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. A photo attached. A small plaque being mounted in a port office in recognition of whistleblowers who protected lives. Claire closed her eyes. Let the moment pass through her without resistance. She turned away from the window and toward the table where her new notebook lay open, pen resting across the page. She wrote a single line at the top. "Pay attention." Then she kept going. The invitation arrived without ceremony. Folded once, slid under her door like an afterthought. No letterhead, no flourish. Just a date, a time, and an address printed in clean black ink. Federal Building, 7th floor. Oversight Committee. Claire read it twice, then set it on the table and made to coffee. She didn't feel dread. She felt readiness, the kind that comes after you've already survived the worst version of the question. The hearing room was smaller than the courtroom had been. No audience gallery, no cameras, just a long table microphones and people who had learned to listen the hard way. Claire took her seat and placed her notebook in front of her, the one she had rewritten, the one that no longer carried fear in its margins. A man with white hair and a tired face leaned toward his microphone. "Ms. Donovan," he said, "thank you for coming." She nodded. "I didn't come for thanks." A few of them smiled, not indulgently, respectfully. They asked her how it started, not with the crime, but with the silence. Who spoke first? Who didn't? Who noticed patterns and who chose not to see them? Claire answered slowly, choosing each word as if it mattered. "Because it did. It doesn't begin with a villain," she said. "It begins with a convenience. Someone makes it easier to look away. Then they reward you for it." A woman across the table leaned forward. "And how does it end?" Claire didn't answer right away. She thought of Frank on the dock, of Eleanor in her office at dawn, of her daughter standing in the doorway, asking to learn. It ends when someone decides that discomfort is cheaper than regret, she said. When the hearing adjourned, one of the committee members stopped her in the hallway. "You understand," he said, "that this makes you a public figure now." Claire met his gaze. "Only if I let it." The following weeks tested that resolve. Requests came steadily. Interviews, panels, a book proposal that promised clarity in exchange for intimacy. Claire declined most of them. She learned to say no without apology. But some invitations felt different. A community center in Everett asked her to speak to a group of women who worked night shifts at the port. A vocational school wanted her to review their safety curriculum. A retired dock worker sent her a handwritten note thanking her for naming something he'd lived with for years, but never understood. Those she accepted. She stood in small rooms with bad lighting and folding chairs and spoke without polish. She talked about noticing what didn't fit, about writing things down even when no one asked, about trusting memory. After one talk, an older woman approached, her hands shaking slightly. "I thought it was just me," she said. Claire shook her head. "It never is." At home, the apartment filled slowly with life. Her daughter visited often now. They cooked together, learned each other again without the old shadows pressing in. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, her daughter said, "You know people keep calling you brave." Claire smiled faintly. "That's usually what they say when they're glad it wasn't them." Her daughter laughed, then grew serious. "You didn't break," she said, "even when he tried." Claire looked at her. "I bent. A lot. That's not the same thing." The non-profit Eleanor had mentioned finally made an offer. Not a figurehead role, a working one, advisory, quiet, structural. Claire accepted. The office was modest, a few desks, whiteboards covered in notes, people who argued with care and listened when corrected. On her first day, Claire erased a phrase someone had written in bold marker. Risk mitigation. She replaced it with 2 words. Early attention. Months passed. The city shifted into a different season. The ports operated under new oversight. Audits became routine instead of reactive. One afternoon, Claire received a message from Thomas Reed. A single line. He pled out. Cooperation full. Sentence pending. She read it once, then closed the message. The man no longer occupied space in her mind. That felt like the real verdict. On a quiet Sunday morning, Claire returned to the dock in Tacoma. Not as a witness, not as an investigator, just as a woman standing near the water watching the rhythm she had always loved. Frank met her there. He wore a jacket that smelled faintly of oil and coffee. They changed the labels, he said, nodding toward a container. Harder to fake now. Claire nodded. Good. They walked along the pier in silence. Gulls cried overhead. The water moved steady and indifferent. "You ever miss it?" Frank asked. "The fight," Claire considered. "I miss the clarity," she said. "Not the cost." As the sun dipped lower, painting the water copper, Claire felt the quiet certainty settle again. The one she'd been building toward all along. She had told the truth. She had watched it land. She had learned when to speak and when to step back. That night she returned home and opened her notebook once more. She added a final page. Not a warning, not a confession, an instruction. Notice early. Write it down. Share it when it matters. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf beside the others, the ones that no longer needed hiding. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, Claire Donovan rested in the knowledge that some stories don't end with applause or ruin, but with systems made safer by people who finally chose to pay attention. and that she knew now was enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, postmarked from a correctional facility she did not bother to look up. Claire held it for a long moment without opening it. The envelope was thin, official, the kind that pretended to be neutral while carrying the weight of consequence. She set it on the table beside her notebook and made tea, letting the kettle scream itself empty before she poured. When she finally broke the seal, the paper inside was folded carefully, as if restraint could pass for humility. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he had been under pressure. He wrote that he never imagined things would go so far. He wrote that he hoped she could understand. Claire read the letter once, then again. She noticed what wasn't there. No names, no admissions, no responsibility that didn't slip sideways the moment it touched the page. She folded the paper back along its crease and placed it in the drawer beneath her notebooks, not as a keepsake, as a reminder of how easily language can be used to avoid truth. That afternoon, she met Eleanor for lunch at a quiet place near the water. The kind of restaurant where conversation stayed private and the view did most of the talking. "You don't have to respond," Eleanor said, after Claire mentioned the letter. "I know," Claire replied. "You won't." Eleanor added more statement than question. Claire smiled. "No." They ate in companionable silence. Eleanor watched her carefully. "You're lighter," she said finally. You know that Claire considered. "I think I'm finally standing on my own weight." Eleanor nodded. "That's the difference." The work continued, but it no longer consumed her. Claire learned the shape of balance, how to give without vanishing. She advised when needed, stepped back when asked trusted others to carry pieces she once held alone. One evening, a young analyst stopped her in the hallway of the non-profit office. "Ms. Donovan," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know when to stop gathering evidence and start acting?" Claire thought for a moment. "When the pattern stopped being private," she said. "When other people's lives were being shaped by it, without their consent." The analyst nodded slowly. "Thank you." At home, Claire's daughter had begun leaving books on the coffee table. Titles about systems, about ethics, about quiet resistance. They read together sometimes, passing volumes back and forth like shared language. One night her daughter looked up from a chapter and said, "I used to think strength was loud." Claire smiled. "Most people do." "What is it really?" her daughter asked. Claire closed her book. "It's endurance with direction." Winter settled in gently. Rain softened into mist. The city felt hushed, reflective. On a cold morning, Claire stood at the edge of the pier again, hands in her pockets, breath visible in the air. A cargo ship passed slowly, newly marked, newly regulated. She watched it move with something like pride. A man she didn't recognize approached older, his posture cautious. "Ms. Donovan," he asked. "Yes." "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "My brother worked on those docks. He didn't make it home one night. They told us it was an accident." Claire felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the echo of so many stories. "They reopened the case," the man continued. "They found things they missed." She nodded. "I'm glad." "So am I," he said. "It doesn't bring him back, but it tells the truth." After he left, Claire stood for a long time, letting the cold seep into her bones. Some truths arrived too late to save, but not too late to honor. That evening, she returned home to find her daughter waiting, coat still on. "I got a job offer," she said. Claire's eyebrows lifted. That was fast. Her daughter smiled, nervous. "It's with a regulatory group, junior role. A lot of listening." Claire reached for her hand. "You'll be good at that." "I learned from you," her daughter said. The words settled deep. Spring came quietly, almost apologetically. Buds appeared on trees Claire had passed for years without noticing. The city seemed to breathe easier. Claire received one final message from Thomas Reed. Sentence finalized. Cooperation noted. Case closed. She closed the message and didn't think of it again. On a Sunday morning, Claire sat at her desk and opened a fresh notebook. Not to document wrongdoing, to plan. She wrote about mentorship, about building systems that noticed early instead of reacting late, about teaching people to trust what they saw before it hardened into regret. She paused, pen hovering, then wrote a name at the top of the page. Hers. Not as ownership, as accountability. Outside, the city moved forward, imperfect but awake. Claire Donovan leaned back in her chair, sunlight warming her hands, and felt the quiet certainty of a life no longer defined by what she survived, but by what she chose to build next. The morning Claire Donovan moved the last box out of the apartment, the city felt unfamiliar in a gentle way, like a place that had decided to let her pass without resistance. The new office wasn't large, a converted floor above a public library, light pouring in through tall windows that overlooked a park where retirees walked slow circles with coffee cups and quiet conversations. The sign on the door was modest. Advisory Office for Public Safety and Oversight. No name, no title. Claire preferred it that way. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set her bag down on an empty desk. The room smelled faintly of paper and fresh paint. Possibility without spectacle. On the wall opposite the window, she pinned a single page from her notebook. Not evidence, not policy language, just a sentence written in her careful hand. Pay attention before it costs lives. By mid-morning, the calls began. Not urgent, not panicked, measured. A port authority asking for guidance on internal reporting systems. A school district wanting to redesign how complaints were logged. A small manufacturing firm asking how to protect workers without burying concerns in paperwork. Claire listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she was precise. Calm. Grounded. That afternoon, her daughter stopped by after work, coat folded over her arm, eyes brighter than Claire remembered them being in years. "I met my supervisor," she said, settling into the chair across from Claire's desk. "She asked me why I applied." "And what did you say?" Her daughter smiled. "I told her I watched someone refuse to disappear." Claire felt the familiar warmth rise steady and deep. "That's a good reason." They walked home together through the park as the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the path. An older couple passed them, fingers loosely intertwined. A man on a bench nodded politely as they went by. Ordinary moments, reclaimed. That evening, Claire cooked dinner for the first time in weeks without checking her phone. The sound of chopping vegetables, the sizzle of oil, the simple rhythm grounded her. When they sat down to eat, her daughter raised her glass. "To quiet courage," she said. Claire clinked her glass gently. "To staying present." Later, after her daughter left, Claire stood by the window, again the same habit, but without the weight it once carried. The city lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere, ships moved under rules that would keep people safer. Somewhere else, a clerk would log a complaint that wouldn't be ignored. The systems weren't perfect. They never would be. But they were awake now. Claire opened the drawer beneath her desk and removed the letter she had never answered. She read it once more, then placed it back not with bitterness, but with clarity. Some words were meant to end where they began. She closed the drawer and turned back to her notebook, adding a final paragraph beneath the last page she had written weeks ago. "Truth doesn't need noise. It needs witnesses." She capped the pen and leaned back, letting the quiet settle. In the months that followed, Claire's name appeared less and less in headlines. That was intentional. The work spread anyway, carried by people who recognized pieces of their own lives in her steadiness. A dock supervisor implemented a reporting change and prevented an accident. A teacher spoke up about unsafe conditions and was heard. A clerk refused to delete a file and saved a career that wasn't her own. No applause followed. No ceremonies. Just continuity. On a crisp morning near the end of the year, Claire received a photograph from Eleanor. A small group gathered outside a port office, unveiling a plaque with no grand language, in recognition of those who spoke when silence was easier. Claire smiled and set the phone down. She didn't go to the unveiling. She didn't need to. That afternoon, she stood at the window of her office, watching leaves fall in slow spirals, and felt something rare and lasting settle into place. Not victory, not closure, alignment. Her life no longer bent around fear or reaction. It moved forward with intention. She turned off the light, locked the door, and stepped into the evening. Just another woman walking home, carrying nothing more than what she chose to keep. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe that quiet truth still matters, and that ordinary people can reshape the systems around them, take a moment to like this story, subscribe for more, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Tell your story.